All around us, every single second of every day, there's this silent, incredibly powerful process happening. It's really the fundamental engine of life on our planet, and it's turning pure sunlight into the energy that fuels, well, pretty much every living thing. So let's get under the hood of this amazing green engine and see exactly how it powers our world.
So our story kicks off way back in the 1770s with a scientist named Joseph Priestley and a really simple but totally brilliant experiment. He put a lit candle inside a sealed jar and, it went out pretty fast. He did the same thing with a mouse and, sadly, it soon suffocated. He figured something in the air was being, in his words, injured. But then he tried it again. This time, he added a mint plant to the jar with the mouse. And what happened? Incredibly, the candle stayed lit and the mouse was totally fine. The plant was somehow restoring the air. But how? What was actually going on? Well, the answer to Priestley's puzzle is this absolutely incredible process, photosynthesis. It's how green plants take the simplest ingredients, sunlight for energy, water from the ground, and carbon dioxide from the air, and they transform them into their own food. And in the process, they release the very oxygen that kept that little mouse alive. To really get this, though, we've got to go microscopic. Let's shrink way, way down and take a journey right inside the plant cell to find the source of all this power. And here it is, the chloroplast. Seriously, just think of this thing as a tiny, super efficient solar-powered factory. And inside this factory, you can see two key areas where all the action happens. You've got these stacks of discs called thylakoids, and then there's the fluid-filled space all around them, which is called the stroma. It's the most obvious thing about plants, right? But that color is also one of the biggest clues to how this whole thing works. So why green? Why that specific color? That green color comes from a pigment called chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is, well, it's a bit of a picky eater when it comes to light. It is fantastic at absorbing energy from the blue and red parts of the light spectrum, but green light, not so much. So what does it do with the green light it can't use? It just reflects it right back out, which is why, to our eyes, plants look green. All right, let's get into the first act of photosynthesis. This is the big moment where the plant captures all that solar energy. It's kind of like a massive power station flicking on all of its switches at once. This first stage has a very official-sounding name, the light-dependent reaction. And it's called that because, you guessed it, it absolutely needs sunlight to happen. No sun, no reaction. And this whole show goes down right inside those thylakoids we saw, which basically act as the factory's super-efficient solar panels. It all happens in 3 key steps. First, chlorophyll grabs a photon of sunlight, and that energy supercharges its electrons. It's a huge jolt of energy. Second, to replace those excited electrons, the plant literally rips apart water molecules. And this right here is the moment it releases the oxygen that we breathe. And third, all that energy from those supercharged electrons gets stored in these tiny temporary molecular batteries. Okay, so let's do a quick recap of Act 1. The plant takes in 2 things, sunlight and water. It then spits out 2 things, the oxygen we need to live, and 2 kinds of fully charged molecular batteries. They're called ATP and NADPH, and you can really think of them as the universal power packs for almost all life on Earth. These batteries are now juiced up and ready to power the next stage. Let's move on to Act 2. Now that the energy is captured and stored, the plant is ready to use it to actually build something real, sugar. This second stage is known as the Calvin cycle, and it takes place in the stroma, which is basically the main assembly floor of our chloroplast factory. This is where the raw materials finally get put together. The Calvin cycle is just like a molecular assembly line. First up, in a step called carbon fixation, the plant literally yanks carbon dioxide right out of the air and locks it into an organic molecule. Then, second, it uses all the power from those ATP and NADPH batteries to build and transform that captured carbon into a simple sugar. And finally, the whole cycle resets itself so it's ready to grab the very next molecule of CO2. It's a continuous loop. And you have to understand, this assembly line is incredibly energy intensive. This is not a cheap process. To build just one single molecule of glucose, that's the plant's food, it has to spend a whopping 18 molecules of its main battery, ATP. That is a huge energetic price to pay for one little sugar molecule. But wait, there's more. On top of those 18 ATP molecules, it also has to spend 12 molecules of its other power source, NADPH. So when you add it all up, you realize the plant is investing this massive amount of captured solar energy just to build one tiny sugar molecule. This is a very high cost but very high reward operation. And this right here is the final product. After all that work, after all that energy was spent, the plant has produced one molecule of glucose. This simple sugar is the energy currency that's going to fuel the plant's own growth, and eventually, it becomes the ultimate energy source for pretty much every other living thing on this planet. So, we've gone from an old experiment in a jar all the way down to the molecular level. Now let's zoom all the way back out and talk about why this tiny green engine is so unbelievably important for all of us. To put it simply, photosynthesis is the foundation of our entire world. It is the primary source of all the food on Earth. It's the base of every single food chain. It produces the oxygen in our atmosphere that allows us and most life to breathe. And, of course, it's the process that drives all of our agricultural productivity, which feeds billions and billions of people. It's everything. You know, when you really think about it, plants perfected this unbelievably efficient form of solar power hundreds of millions of years ago. They even came up with different strategies for it. You've got the common pathway in most trees, but then there are these specialized versions for desert succulents and tropical grasses. It really leaves us with a pretty big question. As we're scrambling to find new energy solutions for ourselves, what can we still learn from the quiet, green engine that has been powering our